A kitten was abandoned at birth, left in a shoebox, barely clinging to life. But what this dog did next made everyone cry. He wasn't just any dog. He was old, scarred, and forgotten. Yet when he saw that tiny kitten, something inside him came alive. He wrapped himself around her, refusing to let go. And that simple act set off a chain of events no one could have imagined. Because behind that night's rescue was a secret, a hidden cruelty that someone powerful would do anything to keep buried. Soon, what started as one dog saving a kitten would explode into a fight for truth, survival, and justice. But as the danger grows and the flames close in, can the bond between a broken dog and a fragile kitten be strong enough to expose the darkest of lies and save them all? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below. And while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The pre-dawn air hung heavy with morning dew as Greer Whitlow's old pickup truck rumbled down the familiar gravel path behind the Hardin County Animal Shelter. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating wisps of ground fog that curled around the tires like ghostly fingers. Greer had made this early morning check countless times before. It was her unofficial patrol, looking for the desperate acts that often took place in the shadows before the shelter opened. Her retired canine partner, Rook, sat alertly in the passenger seat, his graying muzzle pressed against the window. Even in his retirement years, the German Shepherd maintained the sharp instincts that had made him an exceptional service dog. His ears pricked forward, catching sounds that Greer's human ears couldn't detect. Greer pulled the truck to a stop in her usual spot, killing the engine but leaving the headlights on. The sudden silence amplified the subtle sounds of early morning, birds just beginning their dawn chorus, the distant hum of highway traffic, and something else. Something faint. "You hear that, boy?" Greer murmured, watching as Rook's ears swiveled like radar dishes. The old dog's posture changed, his body becoming taut with attention. Scratching. Barely audible, but definitely there. Greer grabbed her flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out into the cool morning air. Her boots crunched on the gravel as she moved toward the sound, sweeping the beam of light across the ground. Rook stayed close to her side, his nose working overtime as they investigated. The scratching grew slightly louder as they approached the back corner of the building, where shadows gathered thickest in the pre-dawn gloom. Greer's light caught the edge of something, a shoebox, partially hidden behind a stack of empty crates. Her heart sank. In her years of experience, nothing good ever came in abandoned shoeboxes behind animal shelters. "Easy, Rook," she said softly as she crouched down. The old dog watched intently as she carefully lifted the lid. Inside, barely visible in the dim light, was a tiny white kitten. It couldn't have been more than a day old, its eyes still sealed shut, its fur still damp in places. The tiny creature was making weak, pawing motions, producing the scratching sound they'd heard, but its movements were growing slower by the moment. "Oh, little one," Greer breathed, her throat tightening. The kitten was hypothermic. She could tell just by looking at it. Without its mother's warmth, it wouldn't survive much longer in the cool morning air. Before she could reach for the box, Rook moved forward with purpose. He whined softly, a sound Greer hadn't heard from him in years, not since their last search and rescue operation. The old dog's entire demeanor had changed, his usual stoic presence replaced by an urgent concern that surprised her. "Rook." The German Shepherd didn't wait for permission. With the gentle precision that had made him legendary in their service days, Rook carefully gripped the edge of the shoebox in his teeth. He looked at Greer, then at the truck, his intention clear. "Okay, boy. Show me what you're thinking." Greer followed as Rook carried the box to the truck. Instead of waiting by the passenger door as usual, he moved to the back, looking at her expectantly. Understanding dawned as she lowered the tailgate. Rook placed the box carefully in the truck bed, then hopped up himself, something he hadn't done in years, not since his hips started bothering him. With infinite care, he nosed the tiny kitten out of the box and curved his body around it, creating a protective circle of warmth. The transformation in the old dog was remarkable. The fierce German shepherd who had once chased down suspects now lay perfectly still, ensuring his movements wouldn't disturb the fragile life beside him. He lowered his head, using his warm breath to help heat the kitten's cold body. Greer stood transfixed, watching as her partner's innate protective instincts took over. The same skills that had once helped them find lost hikers were now focused entirely on saving this tiny, abandoned life. Rook had positioned himself perfectly, shielding the kitten from the morning breeze while sharing his body heat in the most effective way possible. The kitten, responding to the warmth, curled instinctively toward Rook's chest. Its weak movements became slightly stronger as its tiny body began to warm up. Rook's tail thumped softly against the truck bed, a gentle, encouraging sound. Greer checked her watch and did some quick math. Given the kitten's condition and the morning temperature, she knew it wouldn't have survived another hour without intervention. The person who'd abandoned it had probably thought leaving it near the shelter was humane, not realizing the shelter wouldn't open for hours, or that a newborn kitten this young needed round-the-clock care and constant warmth to survive. She climbed into the truck bed beside them, careful not to disturb Rook's protective position. Up close, she could see the kitten's color improving already, its breathing becoming more regular as it soaked in Rook's warmth. The old dog looked at her with deep brown eyes that seemed to say, "I've got this one, partner." Greer gently stroked Rook's head, feeling a profound gratitude for her longtime companion. Even in retirement, he hadn't lost his drive to protect and serve. He'd simply redirected it to this tiny creature that needed him. "Good boy, Rook," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're saving this little one's life." The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, painting the clouds in subtle shades of pink and gold. Greer knew they needed to get the kitten to a vet, but for this moment, she simply watched the unlikely pair, the battle-scarred former police dog and the tiny white kitten he'd taken under his protection. Rook's body remained perfectly still, except for his steady breathing, creating a safe haven of warmth for his tiny charge. The kitten had stopped its desperate scratching and now lay peacefully against his chest, its miniature paws occasionally kneading the air in contentment. Looking at them, Greer felt a familiar warmth in her chest, the same feeling she'd had during their service days when Rook's instincts had led them to someone in need of help. Some things hadn't changed. Her partner still had an uncanny ability to know exactly what to do in a crisis, even if the crisis now came in the form of a one-day-old kitten in a shoebox. She pulled out her phone and took a quick photo, capturing the moment when dawn's first real light touched them. The massive German shepherd curled protectively around the tiny white kitten, a study in contrasts united by the ageless instinct to protect the vulnerable. The kitten's movements were growing stronger by the minute, its little body responding to the life-saving warmth. Rook remained vigilant, occasionally checking on his charge with a gentle nudge of his nose, his eyes alert for any sign of distress. Greer knew this was just the beginning. The kitten would need specialized care, regular feeding, and constant monitoring to survive without its mother. But thanks to Rook's quick action and protective instincts, it now had a fighting chance. The old dog had bought them the precious time they needed by preventing the kitten's body temperature from dropping any further. She reached out and gently touched the kitten's back with one finger, feeling its warmth returning. "You've got quite a guardian angel, little one," she said softly, watching as Rook adjusted his position slightly to better shield the kitten from a morning breeze. The sun was rising properly now, bringing with it the promise of a new day. In the growing light, Greer could see the kitten's color had improved significantly. Its skin was no longer the alarming grayish tone it had been when they found it. Now it was pink and healthy-looking, its tiny chest rising and falling with strong, regular breaths. With the kitten's condition stabilizing but still critical, Greer knew they couldn't waste another minute. She carefully lifted Rook's massive form from the truck bed, the German Shepherd moving with practiced precision to keep the tiny kitten secure against his chest. Together they hurried toward the shelter's back entrance, their footsteps echoing in the empty parking lot. Greer's hands trembled slightly as she fumbled with her keycard. The door beeped, and they rushed inside, the fluorescent lights flickering to life above them. The familiar smell of disinfectant filled her nostrils as she made her way to the supply room, Rook padding silently beside her. "We need formula, heating pads, everything," she muttered, more to herself than to Rook. Her mind raced through the list of supplies necessary for a neonate this young. She'd just reached for the cabinet handle when a throat cleared behind her. "Ms. Whitlow." The voice was cool, professional, and entirely unwelcome. Greer turned to find Sutter Pike standing in the doorway, his pressed shirt and polished shoes somehow immaculate despite the early hour. The shelter director's eyes flickered from her face to Rook, and finally to the tiny white bundle against the dog's chest. "I see you found one of our overnight deposits," Pike said, his tone carefully neutral. He stepped closer, adjusting his glasses. "A neonate, from the looks of it. You know the county policy on these cases?" Greer's jaw tightened. She knew the policy all too well. Humane processing was the sanitized term they used for euthanizing animals deemed too resource-intensive to save. The thought made her stomach turn. "This kitten is viable," she said firmly, meeting Pike's gaze. "She just needs proper care and—" "Which requires resources we simply don't have," Pike interrupted smoothly. "The shelter's budget. Then I'll foster her." The words came out before Greer could even think them through, but she knew instantly they were right. "I have experience with bottle feeding, and I'll cover all the costs myself." Pike's expression hardened slightly. "Ms. Whitlow, while your dedication is admirable, we have procedures in place for a reason. The survival rate for abandoned neonates is extremely low. It would be kinder to—" "To what?" Greer's voice was quiet but sharp. "To kill her without even trying? She's already proving she wants to live." She gestured to where the kitten had begun to stir against Rook's chest, tiny paws kneading the air. Pike's lips pressed into a thin line. "The paperwork. I'll fill it out right now." Greer moved to the office area, careful not to jostle Rook and his precious cargo. She pulled out the emergency foster forms she knew were kept in the desk drawer. "Every signature, every requirement, whatever you need." For a moment, Pike stood perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Then he gave a slight shrug that didn't quite mask his irritation. "On your own head be it, Ms. Whitlow. But don't expect any support from the shelter's resources." "Wouldn't dream of it," Greer muttered, already scrawling her signature across the forms. She could feel Pike watching her, his presence like a cold draft in the room. Once the paperwork was complete, Greer gathered the supplies she needed: formula, bottles, heating pads, and other essentials. She paid for everything from her own pocket, Pike's eyes following her every move. The drive home was tense, with Greer constantly checking on the kitten through her rearview mirror. Rook maintained his protective position, adjusting his body whenever they hit a bump in the road to keep the tiny creature stable. At home, Greer transformed her kitchen into an emergency nursery. She set up a warm, safe space with soft blankets and heating pads, but the kitten seemed most content when staying close to Rook. The old dog had apparently appointed himself as her personal guardian, watching intently as Greer prepared the first bottle of formula. "Okay, little one," Greer murmured, carefully picking up the kitten. "Let's see if you can eat." The next few hours were a blur of feeding attempts, temperature checks, and gentle stimulation to help with bodily functions. The kitten, though weak, showed remarkable spirit, accepting the bottle with increasing enthusiasm as the night wore on. "You need a name," Greer said softly, watching as the tiny creature suckled at the bottle. "Something as special as you are." She thought for a moment, then smiled. "Dovey, like a little dove, pure white and fighting to soar." Rook's tail thumped against the floor in apparent approval. He hadn't left his post once, maintaining his vigilant watch over his adopted charge. Every few hours, when it was time to warm Dovey up again, he would gently nose her back against his chest, providing the living warmth that had saved her life in those critical first moments. Through the long night, Greer maintained the grueling schedule of care that newborn kittens require. Every 2 hours, she prepared a fresh bottle, helped Dovey eliminate, and checked her temperature. The kitten's strength seemed to grow with each feeding, her tiny voice becoming more insistent when she was hungry. As dawn approached, Greer sat on the kitchen floor, her back against the cabinets, watching Rook and Dovey. The massive German shepherd was curled around the tiny white kitten, his eyes half closed but alert. Dovey was sleeping peacefully, her little belly full, her breathing strong and steady. Looking at them, Greer felt the weight of her decision settle firmly into place. Pike's cold dismissal of Dovey's life had awakened something in her, a determination that went beyond just saving one kitten. She thought about how many other animals might have been humanely processed without ever being given a chance. "We're going to prove them wrong," she whispered to Dovey. "You're going to grow up strong and healthy and show everyone that every life deserves a chance." Rook lifted his head slightly at her words, his brown eyes meeting hers with understanding. They had faced challenges together before, during their service days, and now they had a new mission, protecting this tiny life that fate had entrusted to them. The first rays of sunlight began to filter through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow over the unlikely family. Dovey stirred slightly in her sleep, her tiny white paws twitching as she dreamed. Greer reached out to stroke her gently, marveling at how something so small could inspire such fierce protective instincts in both her and Rook. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Raising a newborn kitten was challenging under the best circumstances, and Pike's attitude suggested she wouldn't find any support from the shelter. But looking at Dovey, peaceful and growing stronger by the hour, Greer knew she would do whatever it took to keep her safe. The late morning sun cast long shadows across Greer's front porch when the crunch of tires on gravel announced unexpected visitors. Through the screen door, she spotted Sutter Pike's gleaming county vehicle pulling up alongside a deputy's patrol car. Her stomach tightened as she watched them approach. Rook lifted his head from where he lay beside Dovey's makeshift bed, a low rumble building in his chest. Greer placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Easy, boy." The sharp rap on the doorframe echoed through the house. Sutter Pike stood there, his pressed khakis and polished badge a stark contrast to Deputy Mills's more weathered uniform beside him. "Ms. Whitlow," Pike called out, his tone carrying false warmth. "We need to discuss a matter of county liability." Greer stepped onto the porch, deliberately closing the screen door behind her. I have all the proper paperwork filed, Mr. Pike. What liability? Pike's smile didn't reach his eyes. There are concerns about housing a critically ill animal alongside a former police dog with, shall we say, a documented history. The accusation in his voice made Greer's blood boil. Rook's record is spotless. 15 years of service without a single incident. Nevertheless, Pike continued, producing a folder from his leather portfolio, regulations require us to assess any situation where vulnerable animals might be at risk. Deputy Mills is here to witness the inspection. The young deputy shifted uncomfortably, clearly unhappy about being drawn into this situation. Greer had worked with him before, back in her K9 handling days. You have no grounds for an inspection, Greer stated firmly. I'm a licensed foster with an perfect record. The emergency placement forms I signed give me full temporary custody. Pike's pleasant facade cracked slightly. The forms you rushed through without proper vetting, those can be reviewed, and given Rook's age, his temperament evaluation might need updating. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Greer stepped forward, her voice low but steel-edged. Are you threatening to seize my dog, Pike? I'm merely pointing out that hosting a critical care animal requires certain guarantees. We wouldn't want anything to happen to the kitten, or for Rook to face any unfortunate consequences. Behind the screen door, Rook's growl grew more pronounced. Deputy Mills took a small step back, but Pike didn't flinch. Let me be very clear, Greer said, fighting to keep her voice steady. You're not taking either of them. I have copies of every certification, every commendation, and every foster document filed with the county. Try to push this, and I'll have the state board reviewing every decision you've made as director. Pike's smile vanished completely. Careful, Ms. Whitlow. The shelter system runs on cooperation. It would be a shame if your foster license came under review. Paperwork can be so complicated after all. Is that what you tell everyone who questions your policies? Greer shot back. Is that how you handle all the humanitarian processing cases? Something dark flickered across Pike's face. Deputy Mills cleared his throat. Mr. Pike, maybe we should— Thank you, Deputy. Pike cut him off sharply. We've made our point. He turned back to Greer, his voice dropping. Consider this a courtesy warning, Ms. Whitlow. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. They turned to leave, Pike's shoes crunching purposefully on the gravel, while Deputy Mills cast an apologetic glance over his shoulder. Greer waited until both vehicles disappeared down her long driveway before letting out a shaky breath. Inside, she found Rook still standing guard over Dovey's bed. The kitten slept peacefully, oblivious to the tension. Greer knelt beside them, scratching behind Rook's ears until his growl subsided into a worried whine. It's okay, boy, she murmured. We're not letting anything happen to either of you. As she adjusted Dovey's blankets, something caught her eye. The piece of twine that had sealed the shoebox was still tangled in the bedding. She picked it up, studying the distinctive knot. Memory tickled at the back of her mind. She'd seen this before. Moving to her office, Greer pulled out a file from her days as a K9 handler. 3 years ago, they'd investigated a series of abandoned litters found around the county. The cases had gone cold, but she remembered something about the evidence photos. There they were, identical knots on similar shoebox lids, each containing purebred kittens too young to survive without intervention. The cases had been handed over to animal control, to Pike's jurisdiction, and quietly closed. Greer sat back, her mind racing. This wasn't just about one kitten or shelter policy. Pike's reaction had been too personal, too threatening. He was protecting something bigger. Looking at the knot in her hand, Greer felt the pieces starting to align. The abandoned litters, the quick euthanasia policies, Pike's aggressive response to her intervention. It all hinted at something systematic. something wrong. A tiny mew from the other room pulled her attention back to the present. It was time for Dovey's feeding, and Greer had more immediate concerns than old case files. But as she prepared the formula, her jaw set with determination. Pike had made this personal, but he'd also made a mistake. He'd reminded her that she still had investigative instincts, and now she had reason to use them. Rook watched her with knowing eyes as she settled in to feed Dovey. He could sense the shift in her energy, the way he always could when they were working a case. Greer stroked his head, her voice soft but resolute. "We're going to figure this out, partner. Whatever Pike's hiding, he picked the wrong people to threaten." The county shelter's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Greer waited at the front desk. Her fingers drummed against the worn counter while she watched Kellen Rowe shuffle papers, his lanky frame hunched over as if trying to disappear into his oversized sweater. "I don't know, Ms. Whitlow," he said, glancing nervously toward Pike's empty office. "The security footage is supposed to be restricted to management." "Kellen." Greer leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You've worked here long enough to know something isn't right. Those late-night drop-offs, they're happening too often to be random, aren't they?" He fidgeted with his pen, avoiding her eyes. I'm not asking you to do anything wrong," Greer interrupted gently. "Just let me look at the public entrance footage. That's all covered by open records law anyway." Kellen's shoulders slumped. After a long moment, he nodded. "Give me 15 minutes. Pike's at lunch. I can get you into the storage room." While she waited, Greer checked her phone. The pet sitter she'd hired sent a photo of Rook curled protectively around Dovey's bed, his nose pressed against her tiny white form. The caption read, "They haven't moved all morning. Your shepherd's got a new mission." The image warmed her heart, even as it strengthened her resolve. Whatever was happening here, it had nearly cost that little kitten her life. True to his word, Kellen returned 15 minutes later with a ring of keys jangling nervously in his hand. He led her down a narrow hallway to a cramped room filled with humming equipment. "The system keeps 30 days of footage," he explained, logging into an ancient computer. "But it's not very user-friendly." "I'll manage." Greer pulled up a folding chair. "Just show me how to access the overnight hours." For the next 2 hours, Greer's eyes stayed glued to the grainy footage. She worked backward methodically, noting every vehicle that approached the shelter's after-hours drop-off area. Most were exactly what you'd expect, regular people reluctantly leaving animals they could no longer care for. But then a pattern emerged. "There," she murmured, leaning closer to the screen. "That white county vehicle. Can you zoom in?" Kellen adjusted the view. The timestamp showed 2:30 in the morning, 3 nights before Dovey was found. A figure in dark clothing stepped out, placed something by the door, and drove away. The camera angle made it impossible to see a face or license plate. "Wait." Greer scrolled back further. "There it is again. Same vehicle, same time of night 2 weeks ago." Her fingers flew across the keyboard, jumping back through the footage. The white vehicle appeared again and again, always between 2 and 3 in the morning, always following the same pattern. "Those boxes they're leaving," Kellen said quietly. "They look just like the one Dovey was in," Greer finished. "Exactly like it." She sat back, her mind racing. This wasn't some desperate person abandoning an unwanted pet. This was organized, systematic. And given Pike's reaction to her taking Dovey, he knew exactly what was happening. "Kellen, I need copies of this footage." He wrung his hands. "I don't know if I can—" "People need to know about this," Greer pressed. "Whatever's going on, it's wrong. You know it's wrong." The clerk was silent for a long moment, then squared his shoulders. "I'll need a flash drive." While he worked on downloading the footage, Greer's phone buzzed again. Another photo from the pet sitter. "You've got to see this." The video showed Rook gently nudging Dovey away from the edge of her heated bed. When she wobbled towards the other side, he used his nose to guide her back to the center. The tiny kitten responded instantly to his touch, following his guidance without hesitation. Greer's eyes widened as she watched. She'd noticed Dovey didn't react to sounds, but her response to touch and pressure was remarkable. The way she followed Rook's silent signals. "She's deaf," Greer breathed. The realization hit her like a thunderbolt. Not just abandoned, but deliberately left to die because of a perceived imperfection. "Got it," Kellen announced, holding up a flash drive. "All the overnight footage from the past month." His hands shook slightly as he handed it over. "Ms. Whitlow, be careful. Pike, he has friends in the county office, important friends." Greer tucked the drive into her pocket. "Thank you, Kellen. I know this wasn't easy." He managed a weak smile. Just help them, okay? The animals deserve better than this." The drive home felt longer than usual as Greer's mind churned with possibilities. A county vehicle making regular late-night drops. Pike's aggressive reaction to her intervention. The identical boxes, the same knots, all containing purebred kittens with imperfections that made them unsellable. When she finally pulled up to her farmhouse, the pet sitter was waiting on the porch. "You won't believe what your dog's been doing," she gushed. "It's like he knows exactly what that kitten needs." Inside, Greer found Rook still maintaining his vigil. He looked up at her approach, tail wagging slowly. Dovey was awake, her tiny white form tottering around her bed. When she strayed too close to the edge, Rook's nose gently redirected her. No barking, no whining, just careful, silent guidance that the kitten instantly understood. "You figured it out before I did, didn't you?" Greer asked him softly, scratching his ears. "That's why you've been so careful with your signals." Rook's response was to demonstrate again, using the slightest pressure to guide Dovey toward her water dish. The kitten followed his touch with complete trust, as if they'd developed their own silent language. Greer settled onto the floor beside them, pulling out her laptop and the flash drive. While Dovey nursed from her bottle, Greer began documenting everything: the footage timestamps, the vehicle descriptions, the pattern of drops. With each entry, her suspicion grew stronger. This wasn't just negligence or bureaucratic coldness. This was deliberate, organized, and very likely profitable for someone. She glanced at Dovey, now sleeping peacefully against Rook's broad chest. How many others like her had been discarded because they weren't perfect enough to sell? How long had Pike been covering up this operation? The flash drive held the beginnings of answers, but Greer knew she'd need more. The footage proved the pattern, but not the connection. She needed to find out where those boxes came from, where the animals were born, and who was profiting from their suffering. Rook's tail thumped against the floor as if sensing her determination. He hadn't lost his instincts for investigation work, and neither had she. Whatever was happening at the shelter, they would uncover it. Together. For now, though, Greer focused on the miracle before her. A tiny, deaf kitten, defying the death sentence that had been placed on her, learning to navigate her world through the patient guidance of a retired police dog who refused to give up on her. Some bonds, she realized, transcended all barriers. And sometimes those bonds were exactly what you needed to find the strength to fight for justice. Greer sat in her truck outside the state police barracks, gathering her thoughts. The flash drive felt heavy in her pocket, weighted with evidence that could either save lives or put targets on backs. She needed someone who could navigate both the legal channels and the murky waters of small-town politics. She needed Davian Cole. Through the windshield, she watched him exit the building, his broad shoulders straight beneath his trooper uniform. Even after all these years, he carried himself with the same steady purpose she remembered from their days working cases together. Greer stepped out of her truck, and Davian's face broke into a warm smile. Greer Whitlow. Now there's a sight for sore eyes. Got time for coffee, Cole? She tried to keep her voice casual, but something in her tone must have alerted him. That kind of coffee, huh? He nodded toward his cruiser. Let's use my office, more private. 20 minutes later, they sat in his parked cruiser, behind the local diner, coffee cups steaming in their holders. Greer laid out everything. The abandoned kitten, Pike's threats, the suspicious footage, the pattern she'd uncovered. Davian listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When she finished, he drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. You're suggesting organized breeding fraud. That's not small-time stuff, Greer. I know. She pulled out her phone, showing him photos of Dovey with Rook. But look at what they're throwing away. Perfectly healthy animals, discarded because they're not perfect enough to sell. His eyes softened at the images. Your old partner's taken on a new mission, I see. He knew before I did, about Dovey being deaf. Greer swiped through more photos, showing Rook's gentle guidance of the tiny kitten. He's teaching her to navigate without sound. She's thriving because of him. Davian studied the pictures carefully. This could be bigger than Hardin County. Breeding fraud often crosses jurisdictions. He turned to face her fully. You know I trust your instincts, always have, but we need more than suspicions to move on this officially. That's why I came to you first, Greer said. I need to know if I'm crossing any lines with my digging, and if I find something concrete. You'll have backup, he finished firmly. Just promise me you'll be careful. Pike's got connections, and if this goes as deep as you think, I promise. She met his steady gaze. And Cole, thanks for listening. Always will. He smiled, then turned serious again. Keep documenting everything. And Greer, watch your back. Her next stop was Dr. Leora Pace's veterinary clinic. The silver-haired vet was examining Dovey before Greer had finished explaining the situation. Bilateral deafness, Dr. Pace confirmed, her experienced hands gentle on the tiny kitten. Common in white cats with blue eyes, but this early detection is unusual. Most people don't realize until the kitten's older. She adjusted her practical glasses, watching as Dovey responded to Rook's subtle nose nudge. Fascinating adaptation, though. Your shepherd's essentially teaching her visual and tactile cues. But she's healthy otherwise? Greer asked anxiously. Remarkably so, given her rough start. Dr. Pace's kind face hardened slightly. Though she wouldn't have survived without immediate intervention, whoever left her knew exactly what they were doing. Rook whined softly, pressing closer to the examination table. Dr. Pace smiled at him. You've done a wonderful job, old friend. She's gaining weight, responding well to stimuli. She turned to Greer. What you're suggesting about the shelter, it fits with some things I've noticed. Unusual patterns in the purebreds coming through. Papers that don't quite add up. You'll document your findings? Greer asked. In case we need them? Already am. The vet's voice was firm. I've been keeping records of inconsistencies for months. Just needed someone else to connect the dots. She stroked Dovey's tiny head. This little one might be the key to exposing it all. Greer watched as Rook guided Dovey back into her travel carrier, his movements precise and gentle. The kitten followed his cues perfectly, already trusting his guidance completely. It's more than just sweet, isn't it? Dr. Pace observed softly. What's happening between them? It's proof that these animals deserve a chance. That imperfect doesn't mean unworthy. Exactly. Greer felt emotion tighten her throat. Rook's retired, supposedly past his useful years. Dovey's deaf, deemed not worth saving. But look at them. The vet nodded slowly. Sometimes the most powerful evidence isn't in papers or footage. It's in the living proof of what's possible when we choose compassion over profit. Back home that evening, Greer spread her gathered evidence across her kitchen table. The flash drive, Dr. Pace's medical notes, her own detailed observations. Davian had texted twice already with questions about specific details, showing he was taking this seriously. Rook lay nearby, Dovey curled against his chest. The kitten had learned to feel his breathing pattern, matching her sleep to his rhythm. Every few minutes, his eyes would open, checking her position, ensuring her safety. Greer watched them, feeling the weight of what she'd started. This wasn't just about one kitten anymore. It was about exposing a system that valued profit over life, that discarded the vulnerable instead of protecting them. But she wasn't fighting alone. Davian's steady support, Dr. Pace's professional documentation, Kellen's brave assistance, each piece strengthened their case. And at the heart of it all, a retired police dog and a deaf kitten showed exactly what was at stake. Rook's tail thumped against the floor as she joined them, settling down beside his warm bulk. Dovey stirred, feeling the vibration, then settled again as Rook gently nudged her back to sleep. In that quiet moment, watching her unlikely family, Greer felt the first real surge of hope. They had allies now. They had evidence. Most importantly, they had living proof that every life deserved a chance, not just the ones deemed perfect by someone else's standards. The fight ahead would be challenging, but looking at Rook and Dovey, Greer knew with absolute certainty that it was worth it. Some battles chose you, and this one had chosen her the moment she'd heard scratching from a discarded shoebox in the pre-dawn darkness. The backlash came swiftly, like storm clouds gathering before a tornado. Greer was sipping her morning coffee when her phone buzzed with a frantic text from Kellen. "They suspended me. Pike claims I stole confidential data. Security's escorting me out right now." Her hands tightened around the warm mug. She'd known there would be consequences, but the speed of Pike's retaliation caught her off guard. Before she could respond, another message popped up. "He knows it was me who helped you. Be careful." Rook patted over, sensing her tension. His dark eyes watched as she set down her coffee and dialed Kellen's number. It went straight to voicemail. "Kellen, I'm so sorry. We'll fix this. Call me when you can." She barely had time to process this development when her doorbell rang. A county officer stood on her porch, holding official-looking papers. "Ms. Whitlow, these need your signature." The citations made her blood run cold. 3 separate complaints about Rook, labeled as a dangerous former police dog with aggressive tendencies. The reports cited concerning behavior and potential threat to public safety. "These are ridiculous," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "Rook's never shown aggression to anyone. He's a retired search and rescue dog, for heaven's sake." The officer shifted uncomfortably. "Just delivering the paperwork, ma'am. You'll need to appear at the hearing next week." Inside, Rook lay beside Dovey's bed, the picture of gentle guardianship. The kitten was growing stronger each day, responding to his silent guidance with increasing confidence. The idea that anyone could see him as dangerous was absurd. Greer spent the afternoon making calls, to Davian, to Dr. Pace, to anyone who could help document Rook's true temperament. Her former K-9 unit commander promised to testify about Rook's exemplary service record. Dr. Pace offered to provide professional assessment of his current behavior. But the hits kept coming. That evening, while feeding the horses, she noticed the barn door slightly ajar. Her heart pounding, she grabbed the flashlight from her pocket. "Rook, come," she whispered. He was at her side instantly, alert but silent. The barn's interior looked mostly undisturbed at first glance, but Greer knew better. Small details jumped out at her trained eye. Desk drawers slightly open, papers shifted, file folders not quite where she'd left them. "Clear," she commanded softly, and Rook moved through the space, checking each corner. No intruder remained, but the violation of her property left her shaking. In her office area, she noticed one drawer had been searched more thoroughly than the others. The folder labeled Pike Livestock Supply was slightly damaged, as if someone had hurriedly thumbed through it. She'd started that file after noticing the company name on delivery vehicles that frequented the shelter's back entrance at odd hours. "They're getting nervous," she muttered to Rook. He pressed against her leg, offering silent support. Back in the house, she double-checked all the locks and security cameras she'd installed after Pike's first visit. Dovey mewed from her bed, and Rook immediately went to check on her, his protective instincts never wavering. Greer's phone lit up with a text from Davian. "Just heard about Kellen. This is escalating fast. Need to meet." They arranged to meet at a diner 2 towns over, away from Pike's influence. Greer arrived early, scanning the parking lot for familiar vehicles or suspicious activity. These precautions felt surreal. She was investigating animal welfare violations, not organized crime. Yet Pike's reactions suggested something much bigger at stake. "Your instincts were right," Davian said once they were seated in a corner booth. "Pike Livestock Supply? It's registered to a shell corporation. We're finding connections to high-end breeding operations across 3 states. "The abandoned purebreds," Greer said. "The perfect papers Dr. Pace mentioned." "Exactly. They're running something big through that shelter. The humanitarian euthanasia numbers hide how many animals actually pass through. Perfect cover for a breeding operation." A chill ran down her spine. "And now they're worried we'll expose it. The suspension, the citations, the break-in, they're warning shots, Greer." Davian's face was grim. "These people have money and connections. They won't stop at intimidation if they feel truly threatened." She thought of Rook, gentle giant that he was, being labeled dangerous, of Kellen losing his job for doing the right thing, of tiny Dovey, who would have been another statistic if she hadn't intervened. "I can't back down," she said quietly. "Not now." "I know." He slid a card across the table. "My friend in the state attorney's office. She's interested in what we're finding." "But Greer?" His eyes met hers seriously. "You need to be extremely careful. These people have resources, and they're willing to use them." That night, Greer sat on her porch, watching Rook patrol the property perimeter. The security lights cast long shadows across her yard, and every unexpected sound made her jump. Dovey slept inside, safely tucked in her warm bed, unaware of the growing danger around them. Her phone buzzed with another text from Kellen. "Pike's cleaning house at the shelter. Records disappearing. Had to get a lawyer." She texted back quickly, "Stay strong. Truth will come out." But as she looked around her darkened property, at the barn where unknown hands had rifled through her belongings, at her faithful dog now unfairly labeled as dangerous, Greer felt the weight of what they were facing. This wasn't just about saving one kitten anymore. They'd stumbled onto something much bigger, much darker, and the people behind it were willing to do whatever it took to keep their operation hidden. She pulled out her notebook and began documenting everything. The break-in, the citations, Kellen's suspension, every detail that might matter later. Whatever came next, she would be ready. She had to be, for all their sakes. Rook finished his patrol and came to sit beside her chair, his solid presence reassuring. Inside, they could hear Dovey's soft movements as she explored her safe space. These were the lives she was fighting for, Not just her own small family, but all the animals caught in Pike's corrupt system. The threats might escalate, but Greer had made her choice the moment. She'd rescued Dovey. There was no turning back now, no matter how dangerous the path ahead might become. The autumn wind rattled through bare trees as Greer followed Davian's truck down a winding back road. They'd left the main highway 20 minutes ago, traveling deeper into the forgotten corners of the county where foreclosed properties sat empty and neglected. "This is the place," Davian radioed. His truck slowed, turning onto an overgrown drive that led to what had once been the Miller dairy farm. Greer's hands tightened on her steering wheel. She remembered this property. It had gone under during the last recession, another family farm swallowed by corporate agriculture. But as they approached, she noticed fresh tire tracks cutting through the weeds. They parked behind a screen of trees, out of sight from the main buildings. The autumn air carried a familiar scent, one that shouldn't have been present on an abandoned property. "Animals," she murmured. "Lots of them." Davian nodded grimly. "We've been monitoring this place for 2 weeks. Regular traffic in and out, always at odd hours. Delivery vehicles registered to Pike Livestock Supply." They moved carefully toward the old milking barn. Through gaps in the weathered boards, Greer could hear the sounds she'd been dreading. Whimpers, mews, the rustle of countless animals in cramped quarters. "The warrant comes through tomorrow," Davian said quietly. "But I wanted you to see this first. You started this investigation. You deserve to know what we're dealing with." Using a powerful flashlight, they peered through the cracks. Greer's breath caught in her throat. The interior had been converted into rows of breeding cages. Cats of various breeds, Persians, Bengals, Ragdolls, were confined in spaces barely large enough to turn around. Many showed signs of multiple pregnancies, their bodies depleted from constant breeding. "My God," she whispered. "How many?" "We estimate over 100 breeding females here alone. And this is just one location." They moved to another section. Here, mothers were separated from newborn kittens, preventing natural nursing. "Force weaning," Greer explained, her voice tight with anger. "They take the kittens early to get the mothers breeding again faster. And the ones that don't meet their standards end up in shoeboxes behind the shelter." Like Dovey. The realization made her stomach turn. They documented everything with photos, the conditions, the makeshift medical supplies, the tracking boards that detailed breeding cycles and projected production. Each piece of evidence revealed the scale of Pike's operation. "The shelter's just a front," Davian explained as they returned to their vehicles. "Pike uses it to launder the paperwork. Any purebred strays that come in disappear into the breeding program. The ones they breed here get registered with fake histories, and the shelter's high euthanasia numbers cover for all the culled kittens that don't meet their standards." Back at Davian's office, they spread out the evidence. Financial records showed massive discrepancies between county funding and actual shelter operations. Shipping manifests revealed regular deliveries of specialized breeding supplies. And most damning, bank records showing payments from exclusive pet boutiques across the country. "They're selling these kittens for thousands each," Davian said, pointing to the transaction records. "Rare colors, designer breeds. There's a whole black market for it, and Pike's operation is feeding it." Greer thought of Dovey, her pure white coat, her blue eyes. That's why they wanted her back so badly. She wasn't just another stray. "She's evidence," Davian confirmed. "Living proof of their breeding program. And now that we know what to look for," he pulled out more files. "We've found similar patterns in 3 other counties. Pike's not just running a local scam, this is an interstate operation." The scope of it was staggering. What had started with one abandoned kitten had led them to uncover a network of exploitation and cruelty masquerading as animal welfare. The shelter, meant to be a place of refuge, had become a pipeline for abuse. "What happens to all these animals?" Greer asked, looking at the photos of countless caged mothers. "Once we serve the warrant, we'll need emergency housing for all of them. That's where you come in." Davian handed her a stack of papers. "The state wants to certify your property as a temporary rescue facility. With your canine handling background and foster care experience, you're qualified to help rehabilitate these animals." Greer felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about saving one kitten anymore. It was about breaking a system of institutionalized cruelty, about giving hundreds of animals a chance at the life they deserved. "We'll need to move fast," Davian continued. "Pike has connections. The moment we serve that warrant, he'll try to destroy evidence. We'll have teams hitting all 3 locations simultaneously." They spent hours coordinating with state officials, rescue organizations, and veterinary teams. Each detail had to be perfect. The animals' welfare depended on it. As night fell, Greer finally headed home, her mind racing with all they'd discovered. Rook greeted her at the door, Dovey perched safely on his broad back. The sight of them, this unlikely pair who had started it all, brought tears to her eyes. How many other animals had been denied the chance at such bonds? How many had suffered in those cages while Pike profited from their misery? She picked up Dovey, holding her close. The kitten's purr vibrated against her chest, a reminder of why this fight mattered. Tomorrow would bring raids and arrests, media attention and legal battles. But tonight, watching Rook curl protectively around their rescued charge, Greer knew with absolute certainty that they were doing the right thing. The evidence was clear, the truth undeniable. Pike's operation wasn't just cruel, it was criminal. And soon, very soon, justice would come for all those animals still waiting in the darkness of that abandoned farm. She settled into her chair, Dovey in her lap, and Rook at her feet, and began making calls to local rescue organizations. Tomorrow would change everything, but tonight there was work to be done. The animals Pike had exploited would need homes, care, and most importantly, love. The very things he had denied them in his pursuit of profit. The evening sun cast long shadows across Davian's office as Greer, Kellen, and Davian gathered around a makeshift command center of maps, surveillance photos, and shelter records spread across his desk. Coffee cups dotted the workspace, evidence of their hours-long strategy session. "The van always leaves between 10 and 11 at night," Kellen explained, his fingers tracing routes on the county map. His usual nervous energy was focused now, transformed by purpose. "Pike thinks I don't notice, but I've been keeping track. 3 times a week, like clockwork." Greer leaned forward, studying the pattern Kellen had documented. "And you're sure it's the same vehicle?" "County plate number 473, Kellen confirmed, sliding over a notebook filled with careful observations. "I started recording everything after you found Dovey, dates, times, even which direction they headed." Davian nodded approvingly. "Good work, Kellen. This gives us a solid foundation." He pulled out a fresh map, marking locations with a red pen. "Based on the direction and timing, we've narrowed it down to this area." He circled a cluster of abandoned properties about 20 miles outside town. "The old Miller farm," Greer breathed, recognition clicking into place. "It's perfect, remote, plenty of outbuildings, and the foreclosure's been tied up in court for months." She remembered driving past it during her canine patrol days, never suspecting what might be happening behind those weathered walls. "Exactly," Davian agreed. "But we need more than circumstantial evidence. We need proof of what's happening inside those buildings." Greer straightened, an idea forming. "That's where Rook comes in. He's still certified for scent work, and he knows these operations. If we can get close enough to confirm the presence of multiple animals..." Is it safe? Kellen asked, concern evident in his voice. After what Pike's already tried? Rook can handle himself, Greer assured him, though her heart clenched at the memory of Pike's threats. And he's got extra motivation now. She pulled out her phone, showing them a recent video of Rook and Dovey. The retired K9 was carefully guiding the white kitten through a series of movements, using subtle body language she'd learned to follow, despite her deafness. Their bond is remarkable, Davian observed, watching the interaction. But how does Dovey fit into this? Greer smiled. She's proof of the breeding program. Her coloring, her genetics, she's exactly the type they're producing. And more importantly, she shows how these animals can thrive with proper care. She paused, gathering her thoughts. We're not just building a criminal case. We're showing the difference between exploitation and rehabilitation. They spent the next hour outlining their plan. Kellen would maintain his routine at the shelter, documenting any suspicious movements. Davian would coordinate with state authorities and prepare the necessary warrants. And Greer, with Rook's help, would conduct careful surveillance of the farm. We'll need to be strategic about the timing, Davian cautioned. Once Pike realizes we're onto him, he'll move fast to destroy evidence. Then we move faster, Greer declared. She pulled out her own notebook, sketching a rough timeline. 3 phases. First, we document the van's movements, establishing the pattern beyond doubt. Second, Rook and I do a perimeter check, gathering scent evidence. Third, we coordinate the raid with animal control and state authorities. Kellen shifted nervously. What about inside the shelter? Pike's been acting strange lately, spending a lot of time in the records room. He's probably trying to cover his tracks, Davian mused. Which means we need to secure those records before they disappear. I can help with that, Kellen offered, his voice stronger now. I know where everything's kept, and I have access to the computer systems. Greer reached across the table, squeezing his hand. You've already risked so much, Kellen. Are you sure? He nodded firmly. These animals deserve better. I can't just watch anymore. They worked late into the night, refining their strategy. Davian arranged for unmarked vehicles and surveillance equipment. Greer detailed Rook's search patterns and signals. Kellen created a map of the shelter's security system and file locations. As midnight approached, Greer felt a familiar tension building in her muscles, the same readiness she'd known during her K9 handling days. But this time, the stakes felt even higher. This wasn't just about enforcing the law. It was about exposing a system that had twisted animal welfare into a profit scheme. Back home, she found Rook and Dovey curled together on their bed. The big shepherd lifted his head as she entered, and Dovey, feeling his movement, blinked awake. Together they embodied everything she was fighting for, the possibility of healing, of trust rebuilt, of bonds formed across boundaries. Greer sat beside them, scratching Rook's ears. Ready to get back to work, partner? She murmured. His tail thumped against the bed, and Dovey, picking up his excitement, began to purr. Despite her deafness, she'd learned to read Rook's every signal, their connection transcending the need for sound. The next few days would test them all. They'd need to be careful, coordinated, and quick. Pike had resources and connections. Any mistake could tip him off. But looking at Rook's steady gaze and Dovey's trusting presence, Greer felt her determination solidify. This wasn't just about one kitten anymore. It was about every animal trapped in Pike's operation, every mother cat forced to breed, every rejected newborn left to die. It was about transforming a system that enabled cruelty under the guise of policy. She pulled out her phone, sending a group text to Davian and Kellen. Operation starts tomorrow. Be ready. Their responses came quickly. All set here. Davian records secured. Kellen Greer looked at her unlikely family. A retired police dog, a deaf kitten, and herself, a former K9 handler turned whistleblower. Together they would expose Pike's operation and ensure no more animals suffered in silence. She settled into her planning chair, Rook at her feet and Dovey in her lap, and began reviewing their strategy one final time. Tomorrow would bring challenges, but tonight they had purpose, preparation, and most importantly, each other. Thunder rolled across the darkened sky as Greer checked her watch for the third time. Rain pelted the windshield of her truck, where she and Davian waited in tense silence. Rook lay still in the back seat, his ears perked forward, watching the shelter's rear entrance through the downpour. "There," Davian whispered, pointing to movement in the shadows. The shelter's white van emerged from behind the building, its headlights cutting through the stormy night. Sutter Pike sat behind the wheel, his face illuminated by occasional flashes of lightning. "Ready?" Greer asked, her hand steady on the gear shift. Davian nodded, speaking quietly into his radio. "Target is mobile. All units maintain distance and radio silence." They followed the van through winding county roads, keeping 3 car lengths back. The storm provided perfect cover, their headlights just one set among many in the rainy darkness. Greer's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as they turned onto Old Mill Road, heading toward the abandoned Thompson farm. "He's slowing down," Davian observed, his voice barely audible above the rain. The van's brake lights flared red through the downpour as it turned onto a rutted driveway. Greer killed her headlights, letting momentum carry them past the entrance. They parked behind a thick stand of trees, where 2 unmarked police vehicles already waited. Lightning flashed again, revealing more officers in position around the property's perimeter. "Remember," Davian said, checking his weapon, "we wait for my signal. This needs to be by the book." Greer nodded, reaching back to scratch Rook's ears. The shepherd's muscles were taut with anticipation. Through her raincoat pocket, she touched the search warrant Davian had secured. Everything legal, everything documented. They watched as Sutter disappeared into a weather-beaten barn. Minutes ticked by, marked by thunderclaps and sheets of rain. Finally, Davian's radio crackled. "Subject Tissot is inside. All units, move in." They moved swiftly through the storm, boots squelching in mud. Rook stayed close to Greer's heel, his training evident in every controlled step. As they approached the barn, light spilled from beneath its doors, accompanied by the distinct sound of multiple animals. Davian positioned his team, then nodded to Greer. She took her place beside him as he raised his voice over the storm. "State Police, we have a warrant." The barn door creaked open. Sutter Pike stood frozen in the doorway, his face a mask of shock and rage. Behind him, under rows of heat lamps, dozens of cages lined the walls. "This is private property," Sutter snarled, but Davian was already moving forward, warrant extended. "Step aside, Mr. Pike. We have probable cause and full authority to search these premises." Greer followed the officers inside, her heart pounding. The barn's interior revealed exactly what they'd suspected. A sophisticated breeding operation. Cage after cage held cats of rare colors and patterns. Nursing mothers huddled with newborn kittens, while others showed signs of recent pregnancy. Heat lamps hung in precise rows, maintaining optimal temperatures for breeding. "Rook, search," Greer commanded softly. The shepherd moved methodically through the space, his nose working. He paused near a metal filing cabinet, pawing at its base. Inside, they found exactly what they needed: detailed ledgers documenting every birth, sale, and disposal. Greer's hands shook as she photographed page after page of damning evidence. Sutter had recorded everything: dates, breeds, prices, and buyers. "Get animal control in here," Davian ordered through his radio. We need proper transport for all these animals." He turned to Sutter, who stood seething between two officers. "Mr. Pike, you're under arrest for multiple violations of animal welfare laws, fraud, and operating an illegal breeding facility." The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed through the barn. Greer watched as Davian read Sutter his rights, the man's face twisting with impotent fury. Outside, more vehicles arrived: animal control vans, veterinary services, additional officers to process the scene. Rain continued to drum on the metal roof as Greer moved through the barn, documenting everything with her camera. Each cage, each animal, each piece of equipment told part of the story. Heat lamp specifications matched those from the shelter's budget. Feeding schedules aligned with Kellen's security footage. The twine used to secure cage doors was identical to what had bound Dovey's shoebox. "Greer," Davian called, waving her over to a desk in the corner. "Look at this." Spread across the surface were shipping manifests and veterinary records. Many bore the shelter's official letterhead, proof that Sutter had been using county resources to support his private operation. "He was filtering the most valuable kittens through the shelter," Greer said, piecing it together. "Using euthanasia records to cover his tracks when they didn't meet his standards." Davian nodded grimly. "And padding the shelter's statistics to increase county funding. It's all here." As if to underscore their discovery, lightning flashed outside, followed by a tremendous crack of thunder. Rook pressed against Greer's leg, and she found herself thinking of Dovey, safe at home, proof of both Sutter's cruelty and the possibility of redemption. Animal control officers worked efficiently, transferring cats to proper carriers, documenting their conditions, preparing them for transport to legitimate shelters. Veterinarians moved from cage to cage, performing quick assessments, identifying those needing immediate care. Greer watched it all with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice was being served, but the scale of Sutter's operation, the sheer number of animals he'd exploited, was staggering. "You've made a serious mistake," Sutter spat, as officers led him toward a patrol car. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Davian stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "No, Mr. Pike. You're the one who made the mistake. Every animal in that barn is evidence. Every document in those files tells your story. It's over." Rain plastered Greer's hair to her face as she watched Sutter being driven away. Around her, the operation continued. Officers cataloging evidence, animal control securing the cats, veterinarians treating the most urgent cases. "We did it," she whispered to Rook, who sat alertly at her side, rain darkening his fur. "We really did it." Davian joined them, holding an evidence bag containing the ledgers. "This is solid work, Greer. Between these records and the animals themselves, he's looking at serious time." She nodded, emotion tightening her throat. "I keep thinking about Dovey, how close she came to being just another statistic in those books." "Instead, she helped expose the whole operation," Davian smiled. "Sometimes the smallest things make the biggest difference." They worked through the night, processing the scene as the storm gradually subsided. By dawn, the last of the cats had been safely transported, the evidence cataloged and secured, the barn sealed for further investigation. Greer stood in the muddy driveway, watching the sun rise through breaking clouds. Rook leaned against her legs, tired but satisfied. They had done what they set out to do, exposed the truth, saved the animals, brought a corrupt man to justice. "Ready to go home?" she asked her faithful partner. Rook's tail wagged once, and together they walked back to their truck. Behind them, police tape fluttered in the morning breeze, marking the end of Sutter Pike's cruel enterprise and the beginning of recovery for his countless victims. The victory felt too easy. That thought nagged at Greer as she drove home through the lightening dawn, Rook dozing in the passenger seat. Sutter's final words echoed in her mind. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." She shook her head, trying to focus on the good they'd accomplished. Dozens of cats rescued, evidence secured, justice served. Her phone buzzed. Davian's name flashed on the screen. "Greer." His voice was tight, urgent. "Sutter's gone." Her stomach dropped. "What do you mean, gone?" "During transport, the deputy stopped for a medical emergency. Sutter was complaining of chest pains. When the ambulance arrived, he somehow slipped away." Greer's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Rook lifted his head, sensing her tension. "I've got units searching," Davian continued, "but I wanted you to know. Be careful." She ended the call, pressing harder on the accelerator. The sun was just cresting the horizon when she turned onto her long driveway. That's when she saw it. Orange flames licking the pre-dawn sky, black smoke billowing from her barn. "No," she whispered. Then louder, "No!" The truck skidded to a stop. Greer launched herself out, Rook right behind her. Her heart thundered against her ribs as she ran toward the inferno. Dovey was in there. She'd left the kitten in her special heated enclosure in the barn's office, safe and secure. Or so she'd thought. The heat hit her like a wall 20 feet from the building. Flames roared through the wooden structure, consuming decades-old timber. The roof groaned ominously. "Dovey!" Greer screamed. Rook barked sharply, pulling at his collar, ready to charge in. She grabbed his harness, forcing herself to think. The barn was rapidly becoming a death trap. But Rook was trained for this. Years of search and rescue work had prepared him for dangerous conditions. Their silent command system could work even through this chaos. Greer dropped to one knee beside him. "Rook, focus." She made the hand signal for "watch me," and his eyes locked onto hers. "Find Dovey. Careful. Silent commands only." She gave him the forward signal, and Rook shot toward the barn's side entrance. Greer followed, pulling her shirt over her nose against the smoke. The heat was incredible, the roar of the fire deafening. Through the thick haze, she could just make out Rook's form as he navigated the burning interior. A massive crack split the air. Part of the roof collapsed behind them, sending sparks and burning debris raining down. Greer's eyes stung, tears streaming down her face as she gave Rook the signals to move deeper into the barn, toward the office. The smoke was worse here, rolling in black waves along the ceiling. Greer dropped to her hands and knees, crawling forward. She could barely see Rook now, but his training held. He responded to each silent command, left, right, forward. Another section of roof gave way. Greer barely rolled clear of a falling beam. The heat was unbearable, the air thick and poisonous. But ahead, through the office doorway, she heard it, a tiny, frightened mule. Rook heard it too. He surged forward, responding to Greer's frantic "go" signal. She lost sight of him completely, in the smoke. "Please," she whispered, choking on the toxic air. "Please." Seconds stretched like hours. The building groaned and shifted around her. Then, through the hellish orange glow, she saw him. Rook emerged from the office, moving deliberately despite the chaos. And there, clutched carefully against his chest, was a small white form. "Come," Greer called hoarsely, backing toward the exit. A support beam crashed down where she'd been moments before. Rook pressed forward, keeping Dovey protected against his body. His fur was singed, his movements growing sluggish from the smoke, but he wouldn't let go of his precious cargo. Not until they reached safety. They burst out of the barn into sweet, clean air. Greer stumbled backward, Rook beside her, as the structure gave a final, thunderous groan. The roof caved in completely, sending a geyser of sparks toward the sky. The heat pushed them further back until they collapsed in the wet grass. Rook gently released Dovey. The kitten was terrified, but alive, her white fur smudged with soot. She pressed against Rook's chest, trembling. He curled around her protectively, just as he had that first morning in the truck. Greer gathered them both close, her body shaking with sobs of relief and rage. In the distance, sirens wailed. Someone must have seen the smoke and called the fire department. But she knew they wouldn't find anything to save. The barn was a total loss. The morning sun rose fully over the horizon, illuminating the destruction. Through her tears, Greer examined her beloved animals. Rook's fur was scorched in places, and he was panting heavily, but his eyes were clear and alert. Dovey, though frightened, seemed unharmed, still safely cradled against her protector's chest. Greer pulled out her phone with trembling hands and dialed Davian. "Greer, are you okay?" "Sutter," she said, her voice raw from smoke. "He burned my barn, tried to kill Dovey, tried to kill all of us." She heard Davian curse, then bark orders to someone nearby. "Stay where you are. I'm sending units now. We'll find him, Greer. I promise you that." She ended the call, looking at the smoldering ruins of her barn. Everything inside was gone: equipment, feed, supplies. But what mattered most was alive, thanks to Rook's incredible courage and devotion. Fire trucks arrived, their red lights painting the smoke-filled sky. EMTs approached to check them for injuries. Through it all, Rook kept Dovey close, refusing to let her go until they were safely inside an ambulance together. As the firefighters worked to fully extinguish the blaze, Greer held her little family close. Sutter had tried to destroy them, but he'd failed. Rook's heroism had proven once again what she'd always known: that love, loyalty, and courage could overcome even the darkest acts of cruelty. The rain fell in heavy sheets as Greer's truck splashed through puddles, following Davian's patrol car. The emergency lights cut through the gray morning like a beacon. In the passenger seat, Rook sat alert, his ears forward, focused on the chase ahead. "He's heading for the spillway," Davian's voice crackled over the radio. "We've got units blocking the other routes." Greer's hands tightened on the steering wheel. After the barn fire, Sutter had fled north, but now he was running out of options. The county spillway meant a dead end, nothing beyond but churning floodwaters from the recent storms. The trucks skidded to a stop in the gravel lot. Through the rain, they could see Sutter's vehicle abandoned near the concrete barrier. Muddy footprints led toward the spillway's edge. "Careful," Davian called out as they exited their vehicles. "He's desperate." Rook stayed close to Greer's side as they advanced. The German Shepherd's training kicked in. This was familiar territory for a former K9 unit. His nose worked the air, tracking their quarry's scent through the rain. The spillway roared beneath them, swollen with storm water. Concrete walls channeled the flood into a thundering torrent. Greer's boots slipped in the mud as they followed Rook's lead along the barrier. "Stop right there!" The voice cut through the rain. Sutter stood at the spillway's edge, his clothes soaked and muddy. In his hand, a pistol gleamed dully in the gray light. His eyes were wild, darting between Greer and Davian. "It's over, Pike," Davian called out, his own weapon drawn. "Put the gun down." "It's not over," Sutter snarled. "You think you can ruin everything I built over one worthless kitten?" Greer stepped forward, ignoring Davian's warning gesture. "It wasn't about just one kitten. It was about every animal you betrayed, every life you treated like a commodity." Rook growled low in his throat, sensing the tension. His powerful body was coiled, ready to move. "You don't understand anything," Sutter spat. "The shelter system is broken. I made it work. I made it profitable." "By breeding animals illegally? By abandoning the ones that didn't fit your scheme?" Greer's voice rose over the roar of the water. "You were supposed to protect them." Sutter's laugh was harsh. "Protect them? They're just animals. Numbers on a spreadsheet. But you had to play hero. Had to stick your nose where it didn't belong." He raised the pistol higher, but his hand was shaking. The rain made the ground treacherous, and he was too close to the edge. One wrong move would send him into the flood below. "Last chance, Pike," Davian warned. "Drop the weapon." Instead, Sutter lunged forward, aiming at Greer. Rook reacted instantly, launching himself toward the threat. The gun went off, the shot going wild as Sutter stumbled backward. Greer moved without thinking. She tackled Sutter just as he was about to fire again. They grappled in the mud, sliding dangerously close to the edge. The gun flew from his hand, disappearing into the churning water below. Suddenly, the ground gave way beneath them. Sutter slipped, dragging Greer with him. She caught herself on the concrete barrier, but Sutter went over, only managing to grab her arm at the last second. Time seemed to freeze. Greer looked down at the man who had tried to destroy everything she cared about. His eyes were wide with terror now, all his arrogance gone. The floodwaters raged 20 feet below, ready to sweep him away. She had a choice. Let go, let the water take him, or pull him back to face justice. Davian was shouting something. Rook barked urgently. The rain continued to fall, making Sutter's grip more precarious with each second. Greer's arm burned with the strain of holding him. This man had threatened her, had tried to kill Dovey, had burned down her barn. He deserved whatever fate the spillway had in store for him. But that wasn't who she was. That wasn't what she had taught Rook about protecting life. All life. "Davian," she called out, "help me." Together they hauled Sutter back over the barrier. He collapsed in the mud, gasping and shaking. Davian quickly secured him in handcuffs, while Rook stood guard, his teeth bared in warning. The rain began to ease as backup units arrived, their lights painting the scene in flashing red and blue. Greer sat in the mud, exhausted, with Rook pressing against her side. She scratched behind his ears, proud of how he'd performed under pressure. "You okay?" Davian asked, returning after passing Sutter off to other officers. Greer nodded, watching as their prisoner was led away. "I couldn't let him fall," she said quietly. "That would have made us no better than him." Greer's muscles strained as she pulled Sutter back from the edge, her principles winning over the temptation to let go. With Davian's help, they dragged him to safety, away from the churning waters below. The handcuffs clicked shut around Sutter's wrists, final and decisive. "You have the right to remain silent," Davian recited, his voice steady and professional as he secured the prisoner. Greer sat back in the mud, her body aching from the fight. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle, washing away the worst of the night. She thought about everything she'd nearly lost, her barn, her animals, her faith in the system. But looking at Rook, who stood guard with unwavering loyalty, she knew she'd made the right choice. Later that evening, back at what remained of her property, Greer watched Rook curled protectively around Dovey. Their fur still carried the faint scent of smoke, but they were alive and together. The little white kitten nuzzled against the German shepherd's chest, responding to his gentle movements despite her deafness. Their unlikely bond had done more than save one small life. It had exposed a web of corruption and cruelty. "They're quite a pair," Davian said softly, coming to stand beside her. "They showed us the way," Greer replied, watching as Rook gently nudged Dovey with his nose. Sometimes the smallest things make the biggest difference. In the weeks that followed, justice moved swiftly. The evidence against Sutter Pike was overwhelming. Breeding records, financial documents, and testimony from multiple witnesses painted a clear picture of his criminal enterprise. The district attorney's office pursued maximum charges, and Sutter faced serious prison time for animal cruelty, fraud, and attempted arson. Kellen Rowe returned to work with his head held high. The county board officially designated him as a protected whistleblower, ensuring his job security. His desk was exactly as he'd left it, though now his colleagues treated him with newfound respect. "You helped break this case wide open," Davian told Greer one afternoon as they shared coffee at her kitchen table. "Without your stubbornness, and I mean that as a compliment, we might never have connected the dots." He watched as Rook guided Dovey through a game they'd invented, the big shepherd using gentle nose bumps to help the deaf kitten track a toy. The state police department held a special ceremony recognizing Rook's actions during the barn fire. The same dog that Sutter had tried to label as dangerous was now hailed as a hero. Local news coverage showed footage of Rook accepting a special service medal, while Dovey perched contentedly on his back, their unlikely partnership a living testament to the power of trust and protection. Greer made it official on a bright spring morning, signing the final adoption papers for Dovey with a steady hand and a full heart. The tiny white kitten who'd once fit in a shoebox had grown into a beautiful cat, her pale blue eyes bright with intelligence despite her deafness. From her favorite rocking chair on the porch, Greer watched as Rook and Dovey performed their daily routine. With just a subtle hand signal, both animals responded in perfect sync. Rook rising gracefully from his spot, Dovey following his lead by watching his body language. Their bond had only grown stronger with time. "They're quite the pair," Davian said softly, joining her on the porch. His hand found hers, warm and steady. The gesture spoke of comfort, of possibilities, of a future neither of them had expected but both now welcomed. Greer squeezed his hand gently. "We all are," she replied, watching as Rook guided Dovey through their evening patrol of the yard. The kitten who'd once been left to die had found more than just survival. She'd found a family. Together they'd discovered something precious, that love, once given, only grows stronger through adversity. Rook circled back to the porch, Dovey trotting confidently beside him. They settled at Greer's feet, the big shepherd curling protectively around his small charge, just as he had on that first fateful morning. But now, instead of desperate survival, their closeness spoke of belonging. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.